The storm was unforgiving, beating against the car like a relentless drum. Rain smeared across the windshield in heavy sheets, rendering the world outside into a blur of gray and black. The traveler's hands gripped the wheel tighter as the tires sloshed through the waterlogged road. Thunder rumbled in the distance, the sky splitting open with jagged flashes of lightning. He had been driving for hours. The map crumpled in the passenger seat, proving to be useless as the landscape grew more desolate with every passing mile. He wasn't sure where he was heading, only that he needed to escape. From what, he wasn't quite certain. Life, responsibilities, the crushing weight of his own thoughts, they all blurred together into a haze of unease. Then, through the downpour, he saw it, a faint outline of a town on the horizon, its darkened buildings barely visible beneath the weight of the storm. The sight sent a strange shiver through him, half warning, half invitation. His first instinct was to pass it by, to keep driving until he reached a more familiar place. But something about the town called to him, like a whispering voice, just out of earshot. The road ahead narrowed, guiding him like a funnel toward the town's entrance, and before he could decide otherwise, he found himself steering into its borders. The rain seemed to lessen as he entered, though the sky remained dark, brooding with unseen menace. His eyes scanned the surroundings, taking in the cracked pavement and hollowed-out buildings, their windows shattered like vacant eyes staring into the void. No signs of life, no sounds except for the fading patter of rain and the steady hum of the car engine. A ghost town abandoned by time, but there was no turning back now. The traveler shut off the engine, the sudden silence almost deafening after the long hours of the storm. He sat still for a moment, staring through the windshield, his breath fogging the glass. The town stretched out before him, a maze of narrow streets and crumbling buildings. The air felt thick, like something was watching, waiting. Reluctantly, he stepped out of the car. His boots splashed in the shallow puddles that dotted the road, the sound echoing eerily off the surrounding structures. Despite the rain subsiding, a mist clung to the ground, swirling lazily around his legs, as if the town itself was trying to trap him. The traveler zipped up his jacket, more out of instinct than protection from the cold. It was unnaturally still here, the air heavy with abandonment. As he walked further into the heart of the town, he couldn't shake the growing sense of unease. The buildings were weathered and worn, their wooden signs swinging loosely from rusted chains. Faded letters spelled out businesses long closed: general store, diner, hotel. But something felt off. It wasn't just the decay, it was as though the town had been waiting, untouched, for far longer than time should allow. He wandered past a row of homes, their windows dark, curtains half drawn as though their inhabitants had left in a hurry. His gaze drifted across the street, and that's when he saw it, a figure, standing in the doorway of an old bookstore. At first, he thought it was a person, a man perhaps, dressed in a long coat with a hat pulled low over his face. But the longer the traveler stared, the more unnatural the figure seemed. Its movements were stiff, repetitive, flicking through the pages of a book that had long since disintegrated into dust. "Hello?" the traveler called, his voice hoarse, cutting through the oppressive silence. The figure didn't respond. It continued its motion, page after non-existent page, as if caught in some endless loop. The traveler's skin prickled with a mixture of fear and curiosity. He approached cautiously, his footsteps sounding louder than they should on the empty street. When he was close enough, he realized the figure wasn't solid. It was translucent, a ghostly outline of a man performing the same action over and over again. His breath hitched. Instinct told him to leave, to turn back and run, but something else, the same pull that had brought him into the town, kept him rooted in place. As he backed away, his gaze twinked over the town square, and suddenly he saw more of them. Figures emerging from the fog, walking the streets, performing mundane tasks in eerie silence. An old woman knelt by a garden, tending to wilted flowers that would never bloom. A group of children skipped rope, their movements slow and mechanical, their faces blurred by the mist. The traveler's heart raced. These were no ordinary people. They were echoes, remnants of lives long lost. The town wasn't abandoned. It was filled with these ghostly memories, locked in an endless cycle of repetition. A sharp gust of wind howled through the streets, and for the briefest of moments, he thought he heard a voice, a whisper carried on the breeze, just barely audible. "Join us?" He spun around, but there was no one there, only the wind and the silent, ghostly figures moving in their eternal dance. His hands trembled as he stepped backward, trying to make sense of the scene unraveling before him. The storm had led him here, but now it felt like a trap, a cage closing in around him. He had to leave. But as he turned to head back to his car, he realized something chilling. The road he had driven in on was gone, swallowed by the fog. Panic surged in the traveler's chest as he turned to retrace his steps, desperate to reach the safety of his car. The figures, the mist, the suffocating silence, it was all too much. But as he hurried back down the street, a deep, unsettling feeling gnawed at him. Everything looked wrong. The fog, once hovering low to the ground, now swirled unnaturally around him, thickening like a living thing. It seemed to twist and pulse, swallowing the buildings in its path, making everything unfamiliar. His heart pounded as he quickened his pace, but no matter how fast he moved, the street stretched on endlessly in all directions. When he reached the spot where he had parked his car, his breath caught in his throat. It was gone. The space where it should have been was empty, swallowed by the fog that continued to shift like something sentient, alive. Frantically, he spun in place, eyes scanning the ghostly shapes of the town. He had been so sure this was the way, but the road, his way out, was gone, replaced by more crumbling buildings and narrow alleyways that seemed to curve in on themselves. There was no sign of the street he had driven in on, no exit. He fumbled for his phone, the last vestige of connection to the world beyond this cursed place. But when he glanced at the screen, it stared back at him blankly. No signal. His breath came in shallow gasps. Panic fully setting in now. He staggered down an empty street, his voice hoarse as he shouted, "Hello? Is anyone there? Please?" But the town was a vacuum, and the silence answered him with eerie finality. This can't be happening. His legs moved on their own as his mind raced. Was it a nightmare? Was he still dreaming, stuck in some twisted loop of his subconscious? There had to be a way out. There had to be. With no other choice, he plunged deeper into the labyrinth of streets, hoping against hope that there would be some clue, something to make sense of this nightmare. His surroundings blurred together as he passed. More dilapidated houses, their darkened windows looming over him like soulless eyes. Each turn felt like a dead end, each street a twisted reflection of the last. The buildings all began to blend into one another, weathered, collapsing, abandoned. And the further he went, the more they closed in on him, like the town itself was drawing him deeper into its grasp. And then he began to notice the changes. Street signs twisted at unnatural angles, their letters barely legible. Symbols, unfamiliar and unsettling, were scratched into the stone walls of the buildings. Circles within circles, jagged lines that cut across doorways like warnings. The deeper he went, the stranger the architecture became, what should have been familiar. The layout of streets, the order of homes, grew more distorted, as if the town had been warped by some unseen force. The ghostly figures he had seen before were still there, but now they seemed off. Their previously mechanical routines had grown more erratic. He passed a man who stood in front of a door, opening it, closing it over and over again. Each time he would pause, as if expecting something to be on the other side, before slamming it shut and starting the cycle anew. Nearby, a woman sat on a porch, her translucent hands cradling nothing, her face contorted in silent sobs, yet no tears came. They were trapped, just like him, endlessly repeating their last moments. What is this place? His skin crawled as he quickened his pace, but something stopped him in his tracks. A sound, faint, distant, reached his ears. It was unlike the stillness that clung to the town. This sound was alive, a low hum, subtle but growing, as though something ancient and unseen moved just beneath the surface. His pulse quickened, a primal fear gnawing at the edge of his mind. It was coming from nowhere and everywhere at once, rising and falling like the breath of a sleeping giant. He didn't know what it was, but it filled him with dread. Desperation and fear pushed him onward. Every instinct screamed at him to escape, but the streets only led him deeper into the heart of the town. With every step, the sensation of being watched crept over him, oppressive and suffocating. There were no eyes on him that he could see, but he could feel their gaze. Whatever inhabited this forsaken place was aware of him now. It was watching, waiting. His footsteps slowed. For the first time, he wondered if he had wandered into something more than just an abandoned town. Perhaps he had never been meant to leave. And perhaps, just perhaps, the town was not done with him yet. The traveler stumbled out of the building, heart racing, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The whispers still echoed in his mind, but now they were joined by something worse, the sensation of being chased. He didn't dare look back. His feet hit the pavement hard, the sound of his own footsteps mixing with the unsettling hum that pulsed through the ground. Get out! Just get out! He sprinted down the street, weaving between the crumbling buildings, his vision blurred by the thickening fog. The shapes of the apparitions flickered in the corner of his eyes, their ghastly forms appearing and vanishing in the dark alleys and broken windows. They were watching him, waiting. The hum grew louder, almost deafening now. It felt like it was inside his head, beating in time with his frantic heartbeat. He ran faster, his muscles screaming in protest, but the fog seemed to thicken with each step, swallowing the streets ahead of him. Then, in the distance, headlights appeared, cutting through the mist like a beacon of hope. There's a way out, his heart leapt in his chest. It was a car. Someone was here. Someone could help him. He ran toward it, waving his arms wildly, shouting at the top of his lungs, "Please, help, over here." His voice cracked with desperation. But the car slowed. It was stopping. He sprinted forward, adrenaline pushing him through the exhaustion. The vehicle idled in the middle of the street, its lights barely cutting through the dense fog. As he neared, the figure inside became clearer. The driver didn't react to his presence, just sat motionless, staring straight ahead. He reached the car, banging on the driver's side window. "Please, you've got to help me." The door slowly creaked open. Relief washed over him as he reached for the handle, but then he froze, his blood turning to ice. The figure that stepped out of the car wasn't a stranger. It was him. The same clothes, the same face, the same terrified look in his eyes. His doppelganger stared back at him, blinking in confusion, just as he had at the beginning of the night. It was like watching himself from outside his own body. The traveler staggered backward, his mind reeling. No, this isn't possible. His doppelganger seemed oblivious to him, acting out the same motions he had when he first arrived. He stepped out of the car, looked around nervously, and walked forward, mirroring the exact steps the traveler had taken earlier. The realization hit him like a freight train. He wasn't escaping. He was trapped. He was part of the cycle now. The ground beneath him trembled, the hum rising to a fever pitch. The fog swirled violently around him, and from its depths the figures emerged. The same ghostly apparitions that had haunted him throughout the town now surrounded him. Their faces were hollow, their eyes empty, but their hands, cold and relentless, reached for him. "No, no!" He stumbled back, trying to fight them off, but there were too many. They dragged him to the ground, their grip like iron. He struggled, kicking and thrashing, but the more he fought, the stronger their hold became. The traveler screamed, his voice lost in the swirling fog as they began to pull him away. As he was dragged back, his vision began to blur. He looked up one last time to see his doppelganger standing in the exact spot he had stood in not so long ago, oblivious to the horrors that awaited him. He was about to start the same journey, the same doomed journey. The traveler's body started to fade. His hands, his legs, his entire form became translucent, slipping away from this plane of existence. He could feel it, his very essence being ripped from him, leaving behind only a shell, only a memory. The last thing he saw before the darkness claimed him were the hollow faces of the other souls dragging him into the fog. Just like him, once trapped, now doomed to repeat the cycle for eternity. His soul, like theirs, would wander this forgotten town, never free, forever lost. The car doors slammed shut, and the doppelganger took his first steps into the town, oblivious to the fate that awaited him. And so, the loop began again.